Hey, party people, here we are, another CyberSoul episode, and been looking forward to this one. Dan the man Panesar, nice to see you. How are you? Are you well?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me. It's my podcast debut.
Mate, we'll look
Very
after
excited.
you. We'll look after you, I promise. I promise. And it's great to have you on board. Looking for, as always, for me, the objective is to get behind the business and hear it from the people. And I'm really interested in finding out a little bit more about you. Always enjoyed working with you, doing business together, or just talking to you. For me, it was, passion's always come out of every, conversation that we've had. Let's start right at the very beginning, like every good podcast does. Where did it all start for you, Dan?
Oh God, yeah, it's going back a few years. Well, I grew up in Berkshire, in Wokingham, a little town outside Reading. I suppose uniquely, I was brought up in a single parent, single mum who worked really hard. So very early on, the work ethic was always there. But I was very fortunate to have a big family around me. I'm sort of come from Indian heritage, so that family ethos is massively important. And my grandfather and grandmother were had a big hand in my upbringing with my brother and my sister. So yeah, but it was a normal upbringing. Went to local primary schools and then lucky enough to get into what was then the sort of the leading comprehensive school, which was very into like sports, particularly football at the time, and then later on rugby, which really sort of formed a massive part of my life, and did all the usual things growing up. Had the Saturday job. Started out at Burger King. That was my first sort of intro into working life. My parents and my grandparents said, you need to go and get a job. We're not paying you pocket money for unstacking the dishwasher once a week. And that was sort of the first sort of step into the working world, and I really enjoyed it. Learned how to make whoppers.
And what were the things, when you look back, obviously you say you enjoyed it, what were the things that stood out to you there on that business?
I think early on, like the team ethic, the team ethos, like in that it was a drive-through Burger King, and there was a few of the boys in there, and very, very quickly it was that whole that camaraderie, that team ethos. Everyone had their role to play in getting things done. And it was also the fun element. It was a lot of fun working there. We clowned around, we made up stuff on the menu to speak on the drive-through and stuff like that. All the usual things that 16-year-old kids do. There was also the huge amount of free food that went out the window when some of the boys came through the drive-through on a Saturday lunchtime. But yeah, it was that togetherness, that team ethos, that banter in the workplace, the things that I think are really important. That culture.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, passions. The young Dan, the always I find always engaging. Have you always kind of had that sort of fire in your belly? What were the things that really floated your boat?
Yeah, so sport was massive for me. I've got an insatiable competitive edge.
I've noticed.
I hate to lose. My dad was a good footballer, and from a young age, football was the thing. Playing at school on a Saturday, on a Sunday, watching him, playing myself, and going through the age groups with your group of mates, and then secondary school that. I continued with the football, but also then discovered rugby, and then that was the sort of the spark that happened for me. But yeah, that was the common theme. Mum and dad were often, that's what they did at the weekend, ferrying my brother and I around to different sporting fixtures, over different lengths of Berkshire. And that was, throughout my school as well. The school I went to was a very good sports school, and a particularly good rugby school. We played all the sort of the Eatons and the Dulwich colleges and the Pangbourne colleges, all the the real top schools, and held our own. And that was, again, underpinned by a real brotherhood of camaraderie and culture that the teachers have built and the ability, of course. We had some great players.
It sounds like sport and that competitive spirit has always been at the core, which I still see coming out of you today. Winning's important, but also doing it in the right way.
Yeah, it's not a win at all costs. That's sort of fundamental. I think too many in our industry, there's people that are willing to cut corners and do things that are probably not, that not necessarily the right thing to do. And I think that my upbringing and my sporting background and everything that I stand for is, you want to win and you want to be successful, but you've got to do it in the right way. And you've got to do it with a smile on your face, and you've got to do it having fun. Otherwise, there's no point.
Yeah. And outside of sport, what else did you get up to?
Well, I'm a drummer, so I'm as an instrument, and that was quite a funny thing because I started drumming to get out of going to school assembly because I hated assembly, I hated singing.
It makes total sense. Sitting still.
Yeah. So it was like go to music, and the thing that I gravitated towards, surprisingly, was hitting things, and that was the drums, and then that's kicked off 20 plus year sort of passion around playing the drums and percussion, which is really, really enjoyable.
So Dan's growing up now. He's teenage Dan. He's good at rugby. He can hit things on the old drums. Tell me a little bit about that transition from education into further education, or did you hit aspirationally where you wanted to be, and what was that trajectory like?
Well, in short, no, I didn't. I didn't meet my expectations. I didn't meet probably my family's expectations either. I didn't do very well in my A levels for many reasons, I remember finding out my A level results. I was on a boys' holiday in Tenerife, and I'd missed I was hungover, and I'd missed the grades that I needed to go to the choices of university that I'd picked. And so it was really thankful to one of my aunts who got on the clearing phones to, I think, UCAS or wherever it was, and got me a place at De Montfort University in Leicester, whose motto is preparation for life. And what a great time I had there. So from a disappointment in the A levels, actually going to university and getting dropped off on that fateful first day at halls of residence and sitting in my room going, wow, I don't know anyone and this is it now. I sort of that confidence that I've always had and that belief sort of kicked in, and I stood up and thought, right, I've got to go downstairs and make some friends. Otherwise, this is going to be a very low.
It's a long trip.
Yeah. And luckily, the first lads that I bumped into are, lads that I've stayed in. I was friends with all through university. I lived with them all through university, and I'm still friends with them, with many of them today. Which is very lucky.
Yeah, nice story. And I'm interested, the clicking in bit, the bit, right, I've got to engage now. What were the things you think that held you back on the A levels? Was it adolescence, or what were the things that stopped you doing that, you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I was probably didn't work as hard as I should have. I thought it would be easier. I think a lot of things have come easy to me in other areas of my life, sport and in drumming and all that sort of stuff, and I assume that that my results were going to fall into place as well. And so when they didn't, it was a bit of a shock, and not a nice shock. So that was probably the first sort of time that I'd felt real disappointment, and I'd seen real disappointment not only from my mum and my dad, he was a bricklayer, bless him, and so a son going to university was what he wanted. But my mum, and then particularly my grandfather, who was he's a very well educated man, very very successful. I hadn't met his expectations, and that was a difficult pill to swallow, put it that way. And something that stuck with me throughout my life.
I think possibly, a reflection point many times maybe is that, that not desperation, but that the wanting that recognition is definitely something that stuck with me, whether that was from my family or other aspects. So Dan, moving towards a career, what was your first move into business? When did you start to become what you are today?
I finished university by the skin of my teeth, and came back home, and I think my mum said to me, right, you got to get a job. You can't go back to Burger King and flip Whoppers, and so like all students that come out of or grads that come out of university, I went to the local recruitment office, and the first sort of thing that came along was an interview for what would have been the distributor then, Aslan. Back in the day.
Yeah, a great name.
And based in Wokingham. And I remember going along to the interview and walking into past the sales floor, and it was just like nothing I'd ever experienced or seen before. There was bells going off, there was people shouting, there was balls flying across the office. And I was just like, wow, this is what an amazing atmosphere and a place to be in. Did the interview, got the job, and then started on the Monday. And like every salesperson, I started out on the phones. But I didn't have a computer then. They printed off an Excel spreadsheet with names and numbers and said, call them.
There's your account list.
Yeah, off you go.
Crack on.
And I was like, okay, great. Luckily, it was something that I found relatively easy. I was relatively comfortable. I didn't have a lot of fear, and I didn't know what to expect. So I just picked up the phone and started talking to people, and quite quickly found that A, I enjoyed it, and B, I was reasonably good at it.
Yes, it's interesting, and looking at the dynamics of sales role today versus sales roles of yesteryear, like the one that you and I, very similar, very similar sort of outlay in terms of few days training, get on with it, here's the accounts, brief on what the internet was, and off we went. So I think it was a bit of a timing thing for us going into a market that was moving. Well, firstly, two questions. One, did you feel the importance or not the innovation that was happening? And two, do you think the innovation and timing helped us or hindered us compared to people starting off in a sales career today?
I think at the time I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I saw it as a job that I enjoyed, that gave me a wage at the end of the month, allowed me to go and continue playing rugby, for Reading at the time. And I had no idea, what I was getting into, and that it would basically be my career and probably one of my passions as well. You've got to love what you do, and you've got to actually. I liken myself to a bit of a closet techie, which the technical people who know me and watching this will laugh.
Yes. And
say he doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. But you have to immerse yourself in that technology. And at that time, we were talking about Cisco, and we were talking about RSA. The tokens had just come out, and we were talking about all these different sort of technologies that were coming out. And I took it upon myself to actually go and sit with the pre-sales guys and learn a bit more about it. And I found that, understanding technically, as much as I could, actually helped me understand and become better as someone that was, essentially on the phone drumming up business. But no, I had no idea what was about to happen and how it would shape my life, basically.
Yeah. And parallels between starting out then and starting out now, because I think it's sometimes easy. I mean, they don't know how easy they've got it, or is it harder to engage on, try and develop new relationships, do new business?
People often ask me that question, and I answer it in two ways. I think, back when we started out, there was no LinkedIn, there was no social media, there was no Twitter, there was nothing around that. The internet was obviously there, but it was basically, people buying and selling to people, and you had to pick up the phone, have a conversation, interest them on the phone,
Know a little bit as well, I thought.
to then go and meet them face to face, and then even then, when you met them face to face, the deal might still not happen. You had to build that rapport, you had to build that trust, you had to understand what they were trying to do, and all of those things, I think, are still prevalent today. But the ways that you're able to get to people and build those relationships has changed. LinkedIn and other social media. They're very powerful tools for being able to influence people in a subtle way.
Yeah, it's interesting, that transition as well, because, if you'd have said to me when I was last employable, which was a while ago, that LinkedIn would be a primary platform to develop relationships, I wouldn't have believed it. But there's many technologies that have started off like that they seem peripheral but end up being fundamental. But it's trying to retain the human element to what you do as well, because I think personality is still important.
Absolutely, people buy from people at the end of the day, and you have to share the same values as people. One of your points, that you wanted to talk about is, how do you choose who you do business with?
That's a really good point. Yeah,
and you have to do it with people that share similar, not exactly the same, but share similar values to yourself. Years ago, I'd do business with anyone because it was out of a necessity. But now, as I've got a bit older, there's people and certain companies that I just, that I know don't share those values, and so I tend not to want to work with them or engage with them because of that. And that's something that I will stick to, and I won't change.
No, I know you won't change. No, and I don't want you to. And where would you say, what are those core values? You talked about trust. That's maybe one that I would expect from, what are the other things that are really important to you?
I think honesty is absolute paramount. Integrity, our school motto was S01, which is to be rather than better to seem to be.
I needed you to clear that one up, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, be yourself. Don't be something that you're not. And I think that is the integrity piece.
What a wonderful statement.
And then the other area is empathy. If you can't understand and empathize with people and the challenges that they're facing, not only in their role if you're selling to them, but also outside of that as well. We've just come through a very, very torrid 2.5 years that has affected loads of people, millions of people, billions of people all over the world. But if you just take the UK, it's affected everyone from how we work, how we engage with people, all of that sort of things. And I think that empathy and being able to empathize with people and know that just because you're having a great day and you're always on a positive footing, not everyone else is like that. And you've got to take the time to try and understand why there's other things that could be impacting the person that you're meeting or speaking to on that particular day.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I think the interesting takeaway, did I feel like that prior to the 2.5 years ago? Why aren't I at the top of someone's list to get something done that I want to personally get? And I think for sure, the experience, blended with the experience that we've had over the years, that seems to be clearer now, doesn't it? I think, and that's probably a good thing.
Yes.
Hey, Dan, you talk really passionately about the values that clearly you hold so dearly. How did you leverage and use those, in your career? Give us a flavour of that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, after Aslan, I moved to London, and I moved to a company called Datetrix, and I was in end user sales, that's where I wanted to be. And so all of those sort of things around, the trust, the honesty, and the integrity, and that desire to win were really useful, and were a big factor in being successful there. But I also, that was probably the first time that I had a real business mentor, a real mentor. At that time, I was only sort of 26 years old. Mahmood Chowdhury is his name.
Yeah.
He's sold Datrix now, but he'll if he's
Big
watching.
shout out to Mahmood. Yeah.
And he really he saw in me that, I suppose he saw that rough diamond that needed a bit of polishing. I had all of the attributes, and I had the character and all of the things that were needed, but I needed shaping and molding, and I needed guidance, and I needed to experience, certain situations and know what to do. And those sort of things, you obviously learn as you're out there, and that was a really enjoyable time there, and I learned an incredible amount. And that's the first sort of time I realised that actually what sort of fundamentally drives me, and the beliefs and the things that I hold dear, I could be pretty successful at building a sales career out of it, and we were very successful there. And the company is still successful now, and I still speak to him every now and again, and that's good. And I sort of kicked on from that, really. I sort of moved on to sort of slightly bigger companies, and I worked for some really, really good sales leaders. And I think, you sort of, like you said, you take the best bits from all the people that you work with and you work for, and then those sort of best bits, then you take what you can, you add your own character to it, and then you take that and you put that out there as your sort of persona and what you want to stand for. And I've worked for some really great companies, and I've worked for some really great leaders, and they're still leaders now, and they've gone on to build really big companies. And I'm lucky enough to still speak to those guys. And I think one of the fundamental things that I'm always pleased about is, and something that I try and grasp hold of, is that how pleased they are to see how well I've done. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but they are genuinely like, they know that the young Dan, the 26, 27-year-old, and now they see the Dan that's in his 40s.
That's the best thing, and I can only sort of echo and understand those views, and that really is for me, it's a good trait for a leader to have, or it's a must-have for a leader to have. It's also almost wanting the altruistic growth and development of others in front of yourself, and obviously with that will probably come success for yourself. But that's a really nice trait and observation.
Yeah. And then, from sales, I think there's an obvious progression that you want to go into that leadership piece. And I was lucky that I got given that opportunity by another good friend of mine, Paul German, who you know very well.
Good old Paul. Yeah, hi there, Paul.
And he brought me in after Sapira. So we had a great time at Sapira. We sold that to Avaya. We spent a bit of time at Avaya. I spent a bit longer there, basically because I could get away with working 3 days a week, and
it makes total sense.
It was absolutely brilliant. But after leaving Avaya, that was the sort of piece of the missing piece of the puzzle sort of formed, and that was the realization I didn't necessarily want to work as an employee anymore, and I wanted to try and do something myself. And so I started the Juniper Bay consulting. And Paul was my first client at Certis Networks, and he brought me in to run EMEA, which was running a team of people. And I said to him, he'd just been made CEO, and I said, Paul, I haven't run a team for properly. And he was like, don't worry about that. He said, I know you, and I know what you bring, and I know what you stand for, and that's what's important here. The rest we can muddle along. And he said, I haven't been a CEO before, Dan, so it's
I love that. That's true, isn't it? That's good.
And I just thought, okay, great. And that was my sort of first leadership role, and I was petrified but also excited at the same time, because there were things that I knew I could do well, and there was things that I just didn't have a clue about. And there are also things that I probably, couldn't even envisage that were going to happen around, how you lead people and how you interact with people, different cultures from different countries. So it was a really challenging time, but it was really nice to do it with Paul, and he's been a big influence, let's just say, on my career. And
he's a very solid guy, and yeah, big respect to him. Yeah, I can see that being a really positive influence. So yeah, I mean, how first gig doing it your way, and I always respected that. And not that there's anything wrong with working for somebody at all, but it's a different way of doing things. You kind of paved your own path in being loyal and hardworking, but ultimately doing it under your own guise.
Yes. So I suppose it was successful, but there were things that I now look back that I would have probably done differently. I think, I had an awful lot to learn going into that role, and I think definitely I made mistakes, but I learned from those mistakes, and that's the most important thing. And also, those mistakes weren't illegal or didn't cost the company any money. So that's always a good thing. But I suppose, yeah, what I found is Dan's way isn't necessarily the right way. And one of the things that I've definitely sort of seen over the last few years is that my sort of, my style was very sort of, lead by example, winning everything side of things, and while that has a place, what I've seen over the last few years and what's become really, really important to me is like that it's more about people. It's more about showing people, that you're vulnerable, and by that I mean that it's okay to say you don't know something. That being accountable yourself as well, and also showing I think as a leader you have to, the fundamental thing is that you have to be able to relate to people not on a business perspective but on a personal perspective, and it's something that I quite challenged. I found it quite difficult because I'm very direct. There's people now that know me well that I'll get on the phone to them and and it'll be a Monday morning and I won't ask them how their weekend was. I'll just get into what I want to get out of that specific call or what we're there to talk about. And over the last few years, I've had to really work on actually asking people how they are. Did they have a nice weekend? What's going on in their life? Because that's such an important part of building a business, of building a culture, of being successful, and it's
empathy. Empathy, and whether that's a client or whether that's a team, I would say I would have shared that, not that struggle, because I didn't find it a struggle, but I think that's a development that's credit to you, and it's a tool. It's a great tool in the locker to have, actually taking that time. So I'm pleased. And where's that journey now for you? Where's the career journey?
Yeah, so I'm working with a Israeli startup called Hunters. Really exciting.
Really cool company.
Very cool company. Founders are really cool. Got a very good boss. A boss that actually he's not from a sales background and he's never been a sales leader.
Right.
But he is Hanan Levin. We'll give him a shout out. He's a brilliant leader. And he shows all of those. Shows all of those things around not knowing, being vulnerable, but also the winning, the tenacity, all of the things that you would expect. And we've got a great EMEA team, full of some really talented people. We're doing very well, and I think that's because they're fundamentally we understand the mission and what we're trying to achieve, and we're all aligned to it. And we're all very like-minded, and we're doing very well.
Sounds like you're in a good home, and I think knowing you that level of respect, and as you talked about the matching of values, if you share that, it's a relationship that's going to work well. And I think knowing that and qualifying that and enables you to hopefully make some good choices on where you're at, where you want to be. So tell me a little bit about your own passion. Very passionate guy. Huge amount of respect for you. What are the things that what are the things that get you up in the morning?
I think the most important thing to me, and the most important thing I stress to people, is that, you know, work is a means to an end. It doesn't define you. The thing that I'm most passionate about is obviously my family. My family is very, very important to me. We, you know, as a family, you know, I've had, you know, some quite terrible things happen. You know, my brother and I lost my mum when we were, you know, I was only 28 at the time. And that, you know, that sort of incident happening, or that sort of catastrophic event was really hard to deal with at the time. And I had, you know, challenges dealing with that. And so that has led me to, you know, that family is everything, you know, and I take that
Credit to you.
Yeah, into my work, you know, and as a father now as well. I've got 2 girls, you know, 6 and 4. And so that is what gets me up in the morning. And then I was on the flip side, you know, working in a startup, you know, everyone's focused around, you know, numbers and this and that, and winning deals and stuff like that. But I sort of take it back, and people often sort of go, "Cool, that's quite a brutal way." But everyone who's working at Hunters now has a family and has children. And so they need us to be successful. They need the best form of Dan Panesar to go out and win deals with all the team that, you know, because I don't win them on my own. I've got, you know, great SEs.
Yeah, you need some help,
customer
mate.
success people and all of that. But they need that as well, because, you know, they've got their own things and their own worries. And so that family value goes all the way through as a thing that gets me up in the morning. Some people are a bit like, "Oh, wow, that's quite deep." But that's what does get me up in the morning. It's not the money.
Real, Dan. It's real talk.
Yeah.
That's real talk and a great insight. Hey, Dan, we touched on some great people that you've been involved with, interacted with, provided some good influence. I'm interested in getting a bigger picture on that. I think that mentorship is a bit of a collaborative affair. Who else would you sort of recognise as part of your shaping and influence?
Yeah, good question. I think without a shadow of a doubt, my wife, Hannah. She's also got, you know, a very stressful job. She's very senior at Sky, runs a big team, and I've certainly learned an incredible amount off of her, particularly over the last 2 years. She's an incredible leader, and, you know, her team is, you know, is big, but also, you know, the age range is quite big, and a lot of her team really struggled with the whole COVID lockdown piece. PR is very, you know, it's very interactive. There's a lot of sociable things there. You know, they're doing premieres, they're doing, you know, junkets for press and all of that side of things. And during lockdown, pretty much all of that, you know, stopped, and there was a lot of, you know, basically Teams and video presence. And I watched how she, you know, kept everything together, kept the culture together, but also she knew when to put an arm around people, and she really led by example. She noticed pretty much early on that some of her team, you know, were pretty much sat in their flats all day. You know, they weren't, you know, they lived in London. They might be flat sharing or live in a relatively small flat in the middle of London or in southwest London. And she picked up on that really, really early, and led by example by doing, you know, loads of her team calls. She'd be out walking, you know, she'd be like, "I'm going out now. I'm doing my team call." And I went out with her a couple of times, and, you know, just seeing her team, seeing her out doing that, you know, going out, doing the call on a walk, getting the exercise, the fresh air, you know, and also encouraging them to do. That was one particular thing that I thought, you know what, that she's very clever, because she spotted that, and she's, you know, really nailed it. And she, you know, the other thing is how she juggles what she does with being a mum as well.
Yeah.
You know, we've got two young
biggest job of all.
children. Yeah. And I'm useless. You know, I'm not on any school WhatsApp groups. I don't know how the washing machine or tumble dryer works. I don't know what school uniform or what gym kit they need for each day. But somehow, on top of her work, she manages, you know, the house and our children like clockwork. And
She's your hero, let alone your well, and she sounds a wonderful woman, which undoubtedly she would be being with you. So
she's I don't know.
sounds a wonderful influence, and quite a nice combination, combining it with the business influences that you've had, and passion and influence is really important to me. Having these sort of feeds in my life, and the thing that, as you know, that floats my boat is music. It's really important to me, whether that's live music, you know, clubs, whatever that might be. What is the tune that gets Dan Panesar on the dance floor? What do you like, Dan?
Well, being a drummer, anything with a beat.
That makes sense.
What gets me on the dance floor is Motown. I love Motown.
Yeah.
We grew up with it. It was constantly playing in the house. Diana Ross, Luther Vandross, all of those sort of people. But anything with a beat, and yeah, well, I suppose what's a guilty pleasure? Yeah, I'm not going to share my guilty pleasure, but there's a few. I think Celine Dion probably is my guiltiest pleasure. Yeah.
That is a very dirty guilty pleasure. Big up Celine. No, that's all good. Can you dance, Dan? You any good?
Well, I've got rhythm.
Shape?
Yeah, I've got rhythm. Yeah, I can hold a
I would
beat.
have thought so.
Yeah.
Good man, mate. Well, let's see if we can see that one day. Hey, look, Dan. Look, thank you so much for your time. Genuinely want you to be yourself. Continue to be successful, and mate, pleasure having you.
Thank you, mate.
Legend.
It's been a pleasure.
Top man.